lifts up his skirts and takes off after him and gets there first. Why is he wearing skirts? That's what men used to wear. And beats him into the city. It's impossible. Sure, it's impossible. But he did. 2 Kings 6:6. It is impossible for Elijah to throw a stick into a river and make an iron axe head float to the top. But he did. Alas, I've lost the axe. It was borrowed. Oh, okay. Where'd you throw it? Where did it go in the water? Oh, over here. Okay. Get a stick. Whoop, up comes the axe head. Huh? What's that got to do one with the other? I don't know. But today the iron's going to float then. Well, that's impossible. But the guy got his axe back. You know, to have an iron axe in those days was pretty important. A lot of people still dealing with stone ones, they would like us to think. Acts 3:6-8. It is impossible for somebody that's been crippled for his whole life, sitting at the temple gate beautiful, to suddenly stand up and begin to walk and leap into the temple. But he did. But that's impossible. But he did it. Acts 12:15 or 5-10. It is impossible for Peter to walk out of a well-guarded prison without getting noticed. But he did. You look through the Bible and you're going to start finding case after case, story after story, where things that were impossible became possible because somebody believed. Now, I have not by any means touched on all of them here today. You could go on and on and on. It's impossible for somebody that's dead to fall onto another dead guy's bones and come back to life. Yeah, it's impossible, but it happened. It's impossible to walk on water. Yeah. But I know 2 guys that did it. It's impossible. It's impossible to go fishing and find fish coming up with gold in their mouth. I don't know. I'm still waiting for it. I can believe for it. Somewhere in the Cancun, there's a fish swimming around with my glasses. Probably running into all sorts of stuff. But well, that's impossible. No, it's not. It's possible. In fact, I went back for 3 days in a row to see if the water would have washed him up again. Well, Pastor, that will never happen. Oh, but wouldn't you have laughed if it had? The last day my wife wouldn't let me go back. That was probably the day they were there. No, I had given up by the 3rd day. If they're not back yet, then maybe somebody else needed them more. Somebody's probably selling them. Selling them on 5th Avenue. Well, that's impossible. No. Everything is possible if you can only believe. How many more scriptural examples can we find? How many more could we think of in just a few minutes? How many testimonies could we recall of things that have happened in this fellowship? Well, it's impossible to buy a building without money, but we did. Well, it's impossible to buy a building without a down payment. We did. Well, it's impossible for a group to do. Well, we did. That moved into the realm of possibility. Well, it's impossible only if you can't believe. The list could go on and on. You know, the writer writes, he says, you know, we would take everything and try and write it down, then if all the oceans were turned to ink, we would run out of ink. It would if we would start trying to write down all the things that have happened in the realm of possibilities. Because it's impossible that it works. It happens. It's God. The list could go on and we would never get them all written down. Now, the people we have talked about this morning all experience things beyond the realm of their human possibility. Now, the common denominator in every case was a mighty God that specializes in the impossible. A mighty God that specializes in the impossible. Can it happen? It can happen. He is not limited by natural laws or by human limitations. Jeremiah 32 verse 27 says, "Behold, I am the Lord, the God of all flesh. Is anything too difficult for me?" The answer is no. Nothing is too difficult for you. So just take a quick look at some of the stories. Think about some of the other ones you've heard, and this confirms this to be true. Nothing is too difficult for God. Nothing. Last year I began to talk about how there was a time of shifting. That this was a time where people are going to discover that things that had been impossible were no longer impossible. And I mentioned that some have already stepped into it and some have already started. But there's going to keep going to the beginning of this year. Well, I think it's still happening, people. We are still seeing things being moved that hadn't been moved before. We are still seeing things happen that seem to be impossible become possible. One of the things that is going to have to happen is that the Lord is going to have to be able to take the word impossible out of the vocabulary of his people in 2011. Well, that's not possible. I believe it is. I believe that God's people can get used to not saying, that's impossible. I believe God's people need to get used to leaving that word alone. As Christians living under the reign of God, we live in a place where the impossible is constantly in the realm of possibility. The only thing that will limit the activity of God in our lives is our conception of what is possible. What are you seeing as being possible? That's the only thing that will limit God. Now, it has been said that your mind is being renewed when the impossible begins to look logical. But I believe we need our minds renewed. Think about it for a moment. What would happen if you would start seeing the impossible as being the logical way? Well, that's the way God's going to do it. Why? Because it's impossible if he doesn't.
That's right.
This is the year where the Lord wants to remove the word impossible from the mouths of his people. Will you let him remove it from yours? Nobody can do it for you. Will you let him remove it? Now this morning, in closing, what I want to do, I know there's people that are facing different things that seem impossible. And I would just like to agree together for God to come to work on those impossible situations and show the way that makes it possible. So if there's somebody here and you've been battling something and it seems like it's impossible to get around, I would like you to come up, and we're just going to lay hands on you, and we're going to pray for you and agree for the impossible to become possible.